Hi everyone, welcome to the Decentralized Voices podcast. My name is Daria and I'm excited to have Mayra Castillo, people operations expert at the Ethereum Foundation. In this episode, we'll discuss the hiring culture and employer branding in Web3, red flags for candidates, and the most important skills needed to get hired. If you're a hiring manager or looking for a job in Web, this conversation will be insightful for you. Mayra, I'm happy to have you today. Please give a short overview of your background and maybe some interesting or unexpected facts.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, for the invitation, Daria. It's really great to see that you are, of course, giving many talented people in Web3 a voice in this podcast. I really appreciate that. And I think it's interesting for the space to share a bit of what we do behind the scenes at the people operations team at the Ethereum Foundation. So my role is actually to help create an environment where people working at the Ethereum Foundation can focus on what matters most and where they can do their best work for the ecosystem. Right. So in people operations, we support the contributors that are, working at the foundation in a variety of ways, whether it's through systems, policies, processes, or simply being there if they need someone that they can talk to when things get complicated, even, personally. As for my background, I studied actually, this is maybe a surprising fact for some people. I studied hospitality business administration in Mexico, and you can actually tell that it's not really directly related to Web3, but
Yeah.
it makes more sense when you think about it, because hospitality is actually all about creating meaningful experiences for people, whether that means in a hotel, in an airport, for example, even a hospital, right? You have it in the name. So in many ways, the skills that I learned back then, like, being attentive to people's needs and working with diverse groups, when you think about working in a hotel, working in an airport, you think about this multicultural environment that you always have in such places, right? So those things still guide how I show up in my role of today. And working at the foundation allows me to collaborate with people from all around the world, which is something that I initially wanted when I even selected that career for myself. And it's something that I have always valued very, very deeply. So yeah, I think you can tell where I'm coming from. As of my career in Web3, I've been here since 6 years, more or less. I started as an administrative assistant, so also operational part in a Web3 project. And yeah, I was operating or helping the operations of a project called Slockit, which had to do a lot with the DAO incident. And yeah, after that, I joined another project, which was actually run by the same CEO from Slockit. But then I started and I guess like worked more in the area of marketing as a community manager slash public relations slash social media manager. So I actually had to understand more about the technology, because when you work in operations, it's not really that crucial to be up to date with everything that's happening in the ecosystem, right? So yeah, as a community manager, that is very, very important for the work. And I could learn a lot about everything that is happening in the ecosystem, the different players, the different areas that Ethereum has. And yeah, that opened, of course, my horizon, what's happening and what is important for the ecosystem. And yeah, after that, I applied as a people operations support at the Ethereum Foundation. And I've been here since 1 year already. Time runs and it's back again, to operations. But been, I guess, like at the core of, like the protocol development, you can like still come across these terms and come across all the work that the teams at the foundation are doing, which are very technical most of the time, or somewhere in the middle, the ecosystem development, which has to do with bringing that technology to the real world and how we can like match those. So yeah, it's great and interesting to hear what is going on, right now. And yeah, I think my previous experience as a community manager that helped me to uh, kind of like being able to keep up with all those changes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much. It sounds exciting, and all your career is dedicated to interaction with people and understanding them and being empathetic and yeah, making people comfortable in the teams and in the companies. Yeah, thank you. So can you share a bit more? Like, what do you do at the Ethereum Foundation daily, like as a people operations specialist?
Sure. So, one of the reasons I told you about this is, why I chose the career that I chose was because I love the idea of no 2 days being the same. And honestly, that's also true in my role at the EF. It's true, of course, some weeks do have a rhythm, for example, this week, right? But the day to day is always evolving, I would say. For example, right now I'm working on a few different things. For example, helping some team leads manage people processes and capacity within their teams. I'm updating onboarding documentation for new contributors because there's, like constant changes. So that needs to be reflected as well in the documentation that we have. Also migrating some internal documents or forms to platforms that better reflect our values. And also right now working on brainstorming ideas for a second edition of a program that we created at the beginning of this year to support contributor development. So, of course, on top of that, of course, in this week, I'm often, me and, of course, the team lead of the People Ops team, we are often the first point of contact when someone is going through a personal issue that's impacting their work. And we try to offer support in a way that feels human and grounded. So, no matter what's on our plate, the common thread is always how do we support people in doing meaningful, impactful work and feeling well while they do it.
I want to ask you the question that is interesting to many people in the ecosystem. What values should people have to join the Ethereum Foundation?
The culture at the EF is rooted in the long term thinking and, of course, aligned with the broader values of the Ethereum ecosystem. Things like decentralization, open access, privacy. That's something very valuable at the foundation. We also believe, I think you and many people at the ecosystem who have been here for a long time have heard about subtraction. So we believe in that and in building systems for the greater good, building this technology for the greater good. So I think if you believe that this technology has the potential to improve how society works, whether it's through coordination, transparency, like access, you'll probably feel at home at the Ethereum Foundation. It's really less about agreeing on every specific tool or implementation and more about aligning on what matters and what kind of future we want to build.
The Ethereum ecosystem looks more open and more welcoming, more friendly compared to other ecosystems, and especially compared to Bitcoin. And we discussed this with Paul, with Postpolar, and we discussed this that Bitcoin ecosystem is like very masculine and like closed and more proactive, and Ethereum is more welcoming and like for everyone, for different people with different levels of understanding of Web3 and Devcon, DevConnect. They reflect this
Yes,
like mission and values.
absolutely. Absolutely. I think, that is one of the, even if it's not explicitly there, like values about diversity. For example, in Web2, you have so many companies talking about diversity and blah blah. But in the end, this is something that I have also said in other spaces. It's, of course, it's interesting. It's important that a company or a project outlines what their values are, But if those values only stay on the site or the branding documentation that they have and they don't translate into actions, that's still not going to work. So, this implicit value of diversity is there. It's not really written somewhere, but it's great that you mentioned, Devcon, because I remember the very first Devcon that I attended was in Colombia. And being a Mexican, that felt very personal, to be honest, because you wouldn't imagine that such a big event, that I think one of the most important and biggest, in the Ethereum ecosystem, would be held in Colombia, right? Or Latin America. And you had like translations there, you had like volunteers who were Latin American were given priority, for example, or the tickets were, I think that was the same for Thailand, and it's going to be the same for Argentina now that the tickets are, cheaper in that sense, to accommodate as well the income of the people there. So I think, in those small actions that you can have, you are showing the values that your project actually has or wants to outline. And yeah, I think that's where what it comes down to, how you want to show what you really care for. And hopefully when you show that, people see, they are just not talking about it, they are doing something about it, so it makes sense to join. And yeah, I love seeing many women at, in Web3. Of course, whenever there's an event happening, I think you and I, every time that I go to an event, you're there.
Yeah.
That's great.
I want to compare DevCon and DevConnect with the tours of Taylor Swift, because this fun fact: when Taylor comes to any city, and this city earns much money, and people come from other cities to this concert, and the economy of this city and even the country or state grows for few weeks because of this impact. I saw this in Bangkok, how people in Thailand, how people from all Asia, they came to Bangkok and they felt seen, and everything was tailored and dedicated to them and to their development and growth. I expect to see it in Argentina, and maybe we'll have something here in Eastern Europe, in Warsaw, in Kiev. One day I'd be happy to see this DevCon / Taylor Swift effect on local economies.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. That's true. It's kind of like a celebration of cultures, if you think about it, actually. So, yeah, I hope so. Crossing fingers as well.
How can you describe the hiring culture in Web3?
It's very unique. I think many people who, that I've seen who have built a career in Web3 did so by demonstrating their skills in the right place at the right time. And there isn't always a clear path, in my opinion. You sort of have to find your own way. That said, I do think that access is still a challenge. For example, if you don't speak English, or if you're not familiar with the technical, like jargon landscape, it can feel really hard to break in. There are, of course, great communities, and many more are being created, I think, every week, and programs working on onboarding new talent. But I think we still lack, like a strong and structured pathway for people to grow, from being newcomers to long-term contributors. So, of course, you have still opportunities like DAOs, hackathons, bounties, which could be amazing entry points. Actually, it was not really my entry point per se for me when I was working as a community manager, but it definitely was my entry point to understand more about this ecosystem, working at DAOs, just looking for opportunities to contribute without any sort of, like reward on that sense. I just wanted to learn more and see how things worked. And yes, going back to the main idea, these can be good entry points, but they don't really always translate into sustainable goals, right? I I think, however, that, there are some programs that are starting nowadays and internships emerging that help bridge that gap that we have at the moment. And I think it's really important. It's a very important step forward, towards these sustainable careers per se. Actually, I'm not sure if you were aware of this, but the Ethereum Foundation started a coordination for internships throughout the ecosystem where, yeah,
Found this.
yeah. So that's, when that was being planned, this coordination effort, I remember, Perry, she's amazing. She came up with this idea. She was telling me about the exact problem. She's actually, I don't want to give up like too much information about her because, privacy reasons, but I can tell you that she's coming from a country which is not really seeing many opportunities in the job market, right? Not only Web3, but in general. So she wanted to help, of course, people in her country, but also other countries that are in the same situation or in a similar situation to overcome these barriers that we still have nowadays. And one way to do that was through internships that could translate in the long term to a career, right? So that people officially could show what they got, basically their skills on like a practical level. And yeah, if that could translate to a job, to a permanent job, or a long-term job, that was amazing. But she saw this gap and she decided to do something about it. And I heard that many projects actually wanted to host an internship and kept in touch with the foundation and took part of this program. I think that now, I guess like the application should be screened at the moment. And so, yeah, probably they will already have some good candidates on the spot, I think.
And as you mentioned, the Web3 ecosystem is still closed, and like seems that everyone knows everyone. However, like companies compete to the same candidates while overlooking other. My personal opinion is it's because many teams were established by people without any founding experience before, and like
Mhm.
they don't have expertise to evaluate candidates, especially of non-tech fields like marketing,
Mhm.
BD, people, operations, and all these people who can be not a good fit just because, not because of their like skills or achievements, but just because you're not from our community or something. And, I personally had like once feedback like you're not from our community,
Mm.
and it was like, what? It was so fun, but at the same time, it reflects this trend and like this misunderstanding. So, what
Mhm.
do you think can help the ecosystem, not just Ethereum, but in general, Web3, overcome this and become more mature and more open to different people?
Yeah, it's as in, like this closed ecosystem. I think we could, like you and I could discuss this a little bit at ECC when we were talking about seeing the same people every time. Um,
Yeah.
I've definitely felt that too, that, the ecosystem is or can feel very close. In general, I think this space, Web3 is still young. So it makes sense that things can feel a bit too small sometimes, right? We are still at the very early stages of this technology, right? But we're definitely at a point where we should be more intentional about how and where we look for talent. So, for example, I've seen job posts asking for multiple years of experience in Web3. And of course, it all depends on the role, right? Sometimes that's necessary, that requirement is necessary, but not always. So, I think we should ask ourselves, do we truly need someone who's been in the ecosystem for X amount of
10
years?
years.
Yeah, exactly. Or are we maybe overlooking someone with a strong background, even in Web 2? Right? It doesn't really in Web 3, but also in Web 2, and whose maybe current job could translate or is very similar to that role that they are looking for. And their background could maybe bring a fresh perspective and real impact as well in that role that they're looking for, right? So I think, that's kind of like a change of mindset where they start sourcing people, right? And also, I think this also have to do with a bit of what you mentioned. I've seen this tendency sometimes to chase after the most visible candidates, right?
Yeah.
The ones who are active at events or highly followed on social media. But in my opinion, visibility doesn't always correlate with the impact that someone can bring. Of course, there are some roles. I've seen that before, also in previous projects that I worked with, where you need that visibility, right? Kind of like what are they called? Like influencers, right? Like you need that visibility. You need to have someone that to support your project and maybe push it on social media because they already have that credibility within their own, I'm guessing, like community.
Mhm.
But I think that is, again, that is not really the case for many roles, right? So, for example, I have seen some really, really capable, and I've had the opportunity to work with these very capable people who are more quiet contributors, I would say. Um, and they might not be in the spotlight or they might not even like being in the
Mhm.
spotlight,
Mhm.
but their work speaks volumes. And I think we could do a little bit more to diversify how we recognize and also recruit talent in the space. So I guess hiring should be a very well thought process, and yeah, it really needs to translate into what is it that we really need. Because sometimes, when hiring, when you have like thousands of requirements, that of course closes like the doors to many people, right? Who maybe would not apply if they don't check or if they don't tick all the boxes. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I think we have to be more intentional about that part.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I've heard from recruiters that they had, for example, one recruiter shared with me that he had a like task from the team to help them hire CTO, I guess, or like top top engineering person with at least 10K on Twitter.
Yeah. I mean,
And it was impossible. It was impossible because like you can find good engineer, like really like good engineer who works, who spends much time on work on all these processes and innovations and yapping on Twitter,
yeah,
having like more than 10K
yeah,
followers.
yeah,
For what? From where? Like, yeah.
yeah,
So, and
yeah,
he tried to find balance. At least he found the guy with some educational course and YouTube channel. But obviously, he didn't have this K
yeah,
on Twitter. And
yeah.
yeah, so
Yeah, yeah. No, you raised a very important point here because it's not always also sometimes about being in the spotlight or not, about this preference of being seen or not, but it's also about the time that you have, right? It's either like where are you spending your efforts, your energy in the actual work, or do you like need to built in public and like translate everything that you are doing to the public? Do you have the time to do that? Is it really that impactful? I'm not sure. So yeah, that's definitely something. And again, like some people don't really like building in public. It's what it is, right? So yeah, I think sometimes it needs to be a balance of what projects are looking for. A specific aspect is really worth it or not. I mean, you were talking about a number of followers. Actually, there are ways how you can buy followers. Like
yeah, of
that's not
course.
really a metric that a project, even for marketing efforts. In my opinion, that shouldn't be a metric that they really are or should be following on whether a project is successful or not. That doesn't really, in my opinion, translate into the real impact that someone or a project is having.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with you. Okay, so let's talk about red flags because I'm sure you have experience and understanding of what should candidates pay attention when joining the Web3 team?
Okay, so here I can only talk about my red flags, right? Because this will look different for everyone depending on their preferences. But there are a few things that stand out to me. And for example, that could be if a role doesn't have like clear expectations or objectives. To me, that's a concern. Hiring, I think I mentioned this previously, hiring should come from a well thought process and a clear need, right? So if that thinking, if that process of realizing that you need someone and how, in what areas that person should be supporting or what this person should be doing, what are the goals? Yeah, are the requirements, what is the experience that they will need for this role? If that thinking hasn't been done yet, it might signal a lack of structure in general. And I personally love like a very well thought, the process or idea, right? And so, yeah, that would be a red flag for me. One other thing would be isolation, which I think happens very often when I was working as a community manager, I saw this a lot in marketing roles that were designed to be a one person department. And,
You're VP of marketing.
yes, like, yeah, I know. So, where you're like doing so many things in just one title, one marketing team, one person. And that might work for some people. That might be fine for some people. But I personally think it's healthier to have teammates who can also, of course, who can help you execute, but also challenge your ideas. And with that, help you grow. Because if you're just like working on one single thing alone, like community, social media, communications, like everything in one thing, you are only working with your own ideas and you don't have that feedback that you might have with other people who could maybe actually improve those ideas that you're bringing up, right? Because you don't really have that expertise in the team, right? People who hire you for a reason because they couldn't do the job. But I think that is another red flag. And finally, I would say that we should be careful with teams that blur boundaries between work and personal time too much. So, in my opinion, a culture that glorifies constant hustle in the long term can be very harmful. If there's no respect for rest and well-being of someone, it's hard to sustain a meaningful work in the long term, right? Because if that leads to burnout or leads to other health problems coming from that burnout, well, in the end, you are not going to be able to do your work. You are not healthy. Without health, you cannot do anything, right? So that is another red flag for me. So I would say, for me, it's to look for teams that are thoughtful, but not always just fast moving. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's very important, especially the thing of like work-life balance, or we can call it any name, but yeah, this hustle culture 24/7, when you like temporary online or like terminally online, yeah, it's like
Yeah. Sometimes it gets too much. I mean, the space moves quickly anyway. So you will have to you will have to keep up with a lot of information, right? Depending, of course, on how technical you need to be and how like up to date you need to be, I guess, in the ecosystem. But still, that's already a lot of information to process. And if you have to do that constantly, it's not possible. Like I have heard from a lot of people who are like, yeah, you try, but you never are like 100% up to date. Of course not. It's a lot and it's happening very, very fast.
let's discuss employer brand in Web3 and how it differs from Web2. So what do you think?
I think it's not really like Web 2 and Web 3 employer branding are not really really the same, I would say. I think especially in the tech startup world, like in Web 2, companies often put a lot of effort into branding themselves as great places to work, right? They highlight their benefits, their mission, their values, everything that they are about. And in Web3, I don't think that's as common as in Web2, right? There might be projects which do have amazing internal cultures and offer great flexibility or autonomy, but they don't necessarily talk about it. In some cases, I could even say it's because remote first and async work, for example, is the norm in Web3. So it doesn't feel like a benefit worth marketing. But the truth is that these things, in the modern world, matter actually, and especially to candidates making decisions. So we could probably do more to share what makes working in Web3 so special and why people might want to join us. So yes, I think it's not the
Yeah.
same.
Okay, so what kind of employer brand benefits maybe you can name? Because I see that many companies they think that like a higher salary than in traditional businesses it's enough, and remote work enough to have like employer brand and attract newcomers and new team members. What else can be like points or benefits to make this employer brand more mature and more attractive?
That is just a very, very interesting question. I think, like things like the values, we were talking about values, but I think like actions, what that means to your people. I don't know if you're saying that you care about the well-being of, people in your company, then probably you stress that, or maybe you give people time 1 day a month for mental health. That's already a thing in Web2, for example, that some companies have mental health days, right? Or if you are caring about impactful work or work that has to do with, yeah, like having a social impact, right? You could have as well some benefits that can translate into days off, which are specifically thought to be a voluntary day work. That also exists in Web2. And that's not something, for example, that is translated into Web3, maybe because we are not aware of these benefits that are already happening in Web2. But I think, when you can think of your values, what you as a company have, for values or what's interesting to you, then we can think of actions and what sort of benefits your employees or your contributors will be interested about, right? I was also thinking, I read not so long ago that some companies, again in Web2, they were seeing this switch of people caring a lot about their pets. So one benefit that they thought about was giving people like pet health insurance, which was
Nice.
yeah, exactly. So you don't really hear such kind of benefits, right? So it's about the values that you have, but also about the type of people that you have in your project, right? Or in your company. So I would say listen to what people are valuing in your project as well, and think or brainstorm some ideas of how this could translate it into benefits that actually matter to people, right? There's sometimes you hear sometimes from German people, in Web2 projects who make fun of these benefits. There was a time in Germany where many companies were seeing a basket of fruits as benefit, basket of fruits in the office, right? And I mean, it's nice, but does that really matter to your people? Do they want to choose, or will they choose your project instead of another one just because that basket of fruit in the office? I don't know. So it's really
It's
again,
more
yeah,
relevant. It's more relevant, I guess, for office workers,
exactly,
and like good coffee, fruits, all
exactly.
the like healthy snacks, for example.
Mm,
It's yeah, and like good interior. It's more important to office workers,
mm.
and yeah, because I worked at the bank, like the biggest Ukrainian bank,
Oh,
and I saw this huge difference compared
uh-huh.
to IT companies and creative agencies, where you have free coffee, free snacks, a lot of things
Mm,
like available without any effort from your side.
mm,
And when you work at the bank, you work at the huge
mm,
workspace, and it's more stressful and more like you don't feel like welcome there. And yeah, so I left the bank, not I worked there not for a long time, but it was good experience to compare and decide that I don't want I don't want to get back there, and I don't want to be at the same place. And I think that people in Web3 and in tech field, in creative fields, they are they have more things like by default than many other people from other spaces and more traditional fields. So
Yeah,
that's that was a
correct.
great experiment.
Yeah, no, I definitely understand. Like sometimes it feels like you're going in the past, when you go and see what's out there in Web2. But sometimes there's, like really good ideas, innovative ideas like this pet health insurance, for example, where you're like, hey, well, yes, why don't we like change a little bit the way that we are seeing benefits and not like offer what everyone else has, but actually tailor that to what your people care about and what you as a project, as a company care about. So yeah, it has to be tailored, I would say.
What do you think? What matters more when getting hired? Having the skills and the rich experience, or knowing the right people?
I actually think it's a mix of both. A lot of people, in my opinion, that got started in Web3, they did so by showing their skills in public spaces. Maybe that was open source projects, online communities, DAOs, hackathons. And those might lead to building relationships with people who are already active in the space and who might guide you as well where to look at. But in my opinion as well, having those connections alone won't get you very far if you cannot back it up with work, right? At some point, the results have to speak for themselves, and your work, your actual skills. If it's like internal work, or the results that are internal, or the results that need to be translated or communicated to external users or your community, or the impact that you're having, that experience, those skills still carry the weight, in my opinion. So maybe, knowing the right people could get you into, like, could guide you of where your skills or experience might be fit. But in the long run, what will speak will be your work. And, that is my opinion about that.
Thank you. And what advice would you give to Web3 job seekers?
I would say keep learning and staying curious. We talked about how this space is moving fast. And I think staying up to date is important, but also they shouldn't forget to build a strong foundation too. I think, I was talking about how I started learning more when I was a community manager and started learning about the ecosystem and what parts were in the ecosystem. So I think that's also good. And also your foundational skills as a professional, marketing and software development and research. It doesn't matter, but build strong foundations because trends come and go, but solid fundamentals will always be relevant, in my opinion. And also, something that I wanted to say, and something that I mentioned in when I was talking with the Mexican community, is that they shouldn't wait for someone to invite you in, right? So find ways to contribute, even in small ways, in DAOs, in bounties, just like reach out, ask questions, propose improvements, share your ideas publicly, or even help others build their own ideas. But let your work be visible as much as you can, at least when you're starting. And I think that will help you create those opportunities that you might need in the very first steps that you are having in Web3, by showing that what you care about and what you're capable of, basically.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your experience.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
it was insightful, and I'm sure that our viewers and listeners will learn much from this conversation. I leave the links to Mayra and to the Ethereum Foundation. If you're not aware with this great organization, you can go check and follow Mayra and ask her questions about Ethereum and about the hiring culture or everything related to these topics. Mayra, thank you for your experience and for sharing all this amount of knowledge with Decentralized Voices. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you as well. It was very nice to talk to you. It's always a pleasure to see you, in real life and also here now. And yes, of course, if you or someone, someone in the listeners has any questions about the Ethereum Foundation that I can help with, of course, reach out to me, or else I will probably just direct your question to the right person, basically.